right, man. Let's vibe it up. Hey, what's up, America? Welcome to Goodnight America. I'm America's sweetheart, Eric Ryan. What we do on this show, not that I have to tell you, because this is the biggest goddamn thing on the internet, but what we do on this show, as a reminder, is that we talk to the very best and the very brightest nonfiction authors that this planet has to offer. And today is no different. Let me introduce you to Jason Del Gandio. Gandio. I had veal Gandio last night. Delicious. Oh, with the capers. So you were the creator of 20-Minute Vibe, and you're the author of the upcoming book, Vibe Talk, How and Why People Talk About Vibes. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes, true.
Let me tell you, some other things about you. You're a PhD in communication studies. You've been studying vibes for 30 years. You're a published author, award-winning teacher, an engaged intellectual, and you're about to be exposed to some immaculate fucking vibes here today. Excuse me. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Eric. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. Good vibes so far, I feel like, though. You?
I agree. Yeah, definitely good vibes. Yes.
No, I feel like you're lying to me, but I let it go. All right, we're gonna get into some deep vibe talk, but what I like to do beforehand, just to set the stage, is to cover some recent news stories that have something, I think they're tangentially related to the guest, particularly today. All right, so I need your expertise on 3 different stories that are going around.
Okay.
Let's talk about the first one here. This is from our friends over at Scientific American. They say that brain waves synchronize when people interact. Here are some highlights from the article. So a study published in Scientific American reveals that when individuals engage in conversation or share experiences, their brain waves can synchronize. This neural alignment, observed in areas responsible for processing sound, sight, and meaning, suggests that the sensation of being on the same wavelength has tangible basis in brain activity. Such synchrony has been linked to improved communication, learning, and social bonding. That sounds like vibes to me. That sounds like vibing on the same level. Do you get that same sense?
Yeah, I think it's part of the same conversation. In terms of whether or not we classify that as a vibe, that's debatable. It depends on how you define vibes. But I think that article and this whole phenomenon of how our bodies sync up with each other is part of the larger conversation that revolves around this thing we call vibes. So yes.
You know what else? So the whole article I found pretty interesting and also hard to believe, only because we're materialists, which I think we can get into later. But this was a few other quotes from the article. It said, in classrooms where students are engaged with the teacher, their patterns of brain processing begin to align with the teachers. In greater alignment may mean better learning. So you are poisoning the youth of poisoning the minds of the youth as a professor. It says neural waves in certain brain regions of people listening to a musical performance match those of the performer. The greater the synchrony, the greater the enjoyment. And couples exhibit higher degrees of brain synchrony than non-romantic pairs, as do close friends compared to more distant acquaintances. This is sort of weird, isn't it?
Actually, I don't think it's weird. I would say it's actually pretty normal, pretty common. I would assume that most human beings have some experience of this synchronicity to one degree or another. So at a musical concert, a sporting event, hang out with your best friends, barbecue in the backyard in the summer, and everyone's relaxed and chilling out, and your bodies fall into a rhythm with each other, and you literally sync up with each other. And we call that synchronicity. We might call that flow or being in the groove. If you're talking about sports, peak performance or in the zone. So I think it's actually fairly common. We're just now getting the science behind how we sync up with our brainwaves.
Do you think the science is ever going to embrace it entirely? Because it's not something until we have like a vibe meter that you can necessarily measure. And I don't think science likes that, do they?
Well, in terms of brain waves, I mean, they do have the equipment and the ability to study that right now, right? To measure that, to see it happen in real life. If we're talking about vibes, again, depends how we define vibes, right? But generally speaking, I'm not sure if a vibe can ever be fully measured, although there are certain nonprofits, certain scholars out there. Again, they're using the word vibe and they're trying to figure out how we sync up with each other, why we fall in love with each other, the emotional states that we have, our affective relationships, so on and so on and so on. So, I mean, science is always changing. And I want to clarify this. In our age of being anti-science, right, with a large portion of our population, I want to embrace science and use science for the right reasons. And I think this article you're talking about is trying to do that. In other words, trying to give us a pathway to understand this common experience we have.
When I went to college at UMass, and the drinking age in Montreal, I don't know if you know, this is 18. So what we would do is drive out to Montreal to drink on the weekends. And right next to Super Sex, which is a strip club, I know, shocking, was a Burger King And the Burger King had a breathalyzer. So you get a Burger King straw, you can blow into the breathalyzer to see how drunk you were. It'll become a fun game. You know, how drunk can we get?
Right.
I think, God, scientists, they need to come up with some sort of hat. So if you have a party, it can measure brain waves, and you can try to see how in sync you can get. Would that be fun for a group of people?
I would buy that for my parties if I could get that in my hands. In my hands, and that was affordable. I'll get 5, 6, 10, 20 of these. Invite all my friends over, and then do the measures in real time and analyze them the next day. That'd be awesome.
Work hard to tell how much you could vibe at the same level. That would be so fucking fun, wouldn't it?
Yeah, totally.
Here's the other thing about the same wavelength thing, and I'm going to talk more about psychedelics later, but I think since it's here now, I think if you've ever been in a room full of people doing mushrooms, it really feels like everybody's on the same wavelength. But measurable, like palpable, like you could cut it, you know? And I think there's something there too. And I don't know if science has studied this, but I do think, and I think it's interesting because you're introducing an outside element to it that then affects brainwaves in a group. I think that's really interesting.
Well, on that note though, it's really about an issue of is a group of people able to fall into the same mindsets, right? And see certain things, feel certain things as a collective. And there's kind of a chicken or egg situation, right? Which comes first, right? Does the feeling come first, and that's why you sync up, or do you sync up, then becomes the feeling, or do they co-arrive, etc.? But nonetheless, if you're talking about psychedelics and everyone's on this particular substance, right, it's going to induce a certain mindset where you'll experience the environment in a certain kind of way. But again, though, I don't think you need psychedelics for this. Like I said before, sports, musical concerts, being in a relationship with someone, we have a tendency to sync up with each other on a regular basis.
I would suggest you go to a concert on psychedelics. There you really double down. Maybe play some football in the parking lot, just involve all the shit. Yeah, and then I think some people I do think I don't want to use the phrase groupthink here because it's not totally applicable, but as I grew up Catholic, I'm a confirmed Catholic. You would go into church and you could tell these people were vibing. That vibe never spoke to me, but I certainly do think, I guess the point is not everybody is susceptible to the same vibe. I know some people just go to sporting events and feel nothing, whereas, if the Patriots lose, I'm suicidal. So there is, that the vibe, it's not 100%, it depends on what vibe is around.
Yeah, I agree. And I want to clarify a few things. So I'm sure you're familiar with the phrase good vibes only, right? It's a common phrase everyone uses, right? But there's not just good vibes. There's all kinds of vibes, good vibes, bad vibes, ugly vibes, pretty vibes, so on and so on and so on. And you can have a group of people that are, let's say, evoking or facilitating a certain kind of vibe that they enjoy. But like you just said, you walk into that room, you can tell they're vibing with each other, but it's not your vibe at all, right? And there can be all kinds of vibes. I mean, I don't want to get too political here, but think of political parties and in particular, certain kinds of political parties right now where there's definitely a vibe in that crowd, but it's not my vibe. I want nothing to do with it.
Right. What a beautiful segue into our next story. Now, I don't know your political affiliations, but I would venture to, let's see. Okay, so the next news story is from our boys over at New America. It's the assault on higher education is an assault on democracy. Highlights from the article. So it discusses how recent political efforts to dismantle diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in universities are part of a broader attack on democratic principles. These actions threaten the foundational ideas of free speech and open inquiry into higher education, potentially undermining the role in universities in fostering informed citizens in social programs. I hate all of this. I think this article is great, though, for a lot of reasons. I think everybody should read it. One of the highlights to me was that they went into the history of the GI Bill, which I didn't know. But this is fascinating. So prior to the GI Bill of 1944, education was only available to the higher classes. But after this, it expanded access to higher education. It made it affordable for working class Americans who had served. So all of a sudden, they're getting higher degrees. They're making more money. It ushered in a period of wild economic success, and it invented the middle class. Now, who the fuck is against this? I have no idea. What they did then is they dangled that as the American dream, and now they're charging outrageous amounts of money for the very same thing that used to be affordable. And here's one other point, and I'll let you react to all of this. But when has the government been on the side of righteousness when they fought college students? Certainly not during civil rights. The history has proven that they fucking lost that one. Certainly not during the Vietnam War, when college students had a lot to do with ending that war. Nobody goes, we should have kept with it. So I just don't understand. Now we're another period where the government is fighting college students. And I believe in the college students. I think they're undefeated, and I think they're going to win this one too. And I sort of like that they're radicalizing these kids in the right direction as far as I'm concerned. How do you feel?
We'll leave back up here first. So you brought me onto the show to talk about vibes, which we've talked about already. We're going to get into later on some more. However, my other expertise is the theory and practice of social justice with a focus on activism and social movements. So this is part of my wheelhouse here, right? Hands down. And I believe that the Trump administration is purposely attacking higher education as part of the autocratic playbook, right? If you study fascism around the world, one of the first things they do is to attack institutions of higher learning. Why is that? Institutions of higher learning, at the best versions of institutions of higher learning, teach people how to think critically about the world around them, right? If you think critically about the world around them, then you're start now calling into question fake news, misinformation, disinformation, propaganda, political parties, all institutions of power, so on and so on and so on. There's a blatant assault on higher education, period, full stop.
Totally agree. And it is out of the fascist playbook. Like this isn't anything new.
No.
But I am, so as much as I hate Velveeta Hitler, I do think he's doing a couple things right by accident. One of which is that we grew up believing that there were checks and balances in the government, that we were safe, that there was, turning around the Titanic is tough. He proved that the system is fundamentally broken. And hopefully after this, if we don't lose, we have our never forget moment without having to go fucking nuclear.
Right.
And the other thing is that I think, like I said, radicalizing college kids is always good for my team. It's very rarely a bad thing. And so I think for a long time, kids didn't have anything to rail against necessarily. And I think back to my college experience, 9/11 happened, but that was a complicated thing. It's like, that could have been a moment of radicalization, but against who exactly? You didn't want to be like anti-Muslim. There was that sentiment, but I don't think it was, college kids didn't really embrace that. I mean, I'm speaking from the perspective of a white male, but there were Saudi nationals, which is confusing. And then we attacked Afghanistan and Iraq. So it was muddy. Right. So, and I don't think there was a long period where there was nothing for these kids to really get really fucking worked up about. Now they have something, which I love.
Yeah. Well, a couple things here. So in terms of what Trump is exposing, I agree to a certain extent, right? We have lived under this veneer of this great democracy, right? And I'm happy to be here rather than other countries around the world. I want to state that, right? But this idea that we're the bastion of freedom around the world simply isn't true. Our democracy has always been flawed. It's flawed right now. And as you said, though, the way Trump is able to come into office and try to dismantle the government from the inside out and make all of these executive orders, et cetera, really does expose all of the cracks in the foundation of our country, which is problematic, right? And as you're suggesting, hopefully after he leaves office, which hopefully he does leave office at some point, right? After he leaves office, we'll find ways to fill in these cracks and make sure people in the future can't do what he's doing right now, right? Mm-hmm. Then in terms of college kids, there's something unique about being college students, right? In the sense that you're first becoming a young adult, right? Most likely on your own for the first time, away from your family, things like that. You're interacting with your peers, and so you're exchanging ideas, right? It's very enthralling. It's very exciting, right? Then additionally, though, you have a certain kind of hope for the future, right? Then you have someone like Trump coming into office that is attacking higher education. So in many ways, it could very well radicalize college students. At the very least, open their eyes up to the problems that are happening in our own country, right? And then they facilitate, let's say, collective action, push back and resist against, what is happening in the White House.
Yeah. It's also collectively, or it's conceptually bizarre to attack college kids in institutions of higher learning and expect them to jump on your side. Yeah. It's not conscription. They weren't drafted into college. They go, hey, I want to get an education. And then you have it in administration going, higher education's bad. So you would think, obviously, these kids are going to go, well, I don't think it is. I'm here. I've signed up. So I don't know. It's an odd technique. I don't think it's worked. I think they're on the wrong side of history, and it's just kids are going to go 3-0 here between civil rights and war. Feeling good about it. I know everybody shits on this generation, but they shit on every generation.
Yeah, I mean, every generation hears this from the older generation. Like, well, back in my day, I did this and we did that. It's like, well, why don't you do something now? Like, why is it only on the younger generation to do something, right? Every generation, every person has a responsibility to make the world a better place, right? Yeah. And then there is a kind of a quote unquote natural generation gap between every generation. So if you think about this, each generation is born into an environment that is literally different than the previous generation. Right? And so by default, there will be some differences, some discrepancies, some basic conflict, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's a natural part of, the evolution of generations from one generation to the next, et cetera. Right. And so in some ways, I would say that college students do have a responsibility kind of to carry the torch, but we all have a responsibility to carry our own torches. I mean, we all, if you want a better world, then you have to take responsibility. Don't just put it off on college students or the younger generation.
Yeah. And really, I'm glad that I didn't have anything to rail against necessarily, because I wasn't going to rail. I'm too comfortable. You know what I mean? I have the soul of a French Duke. I just want to be in a hammock eating soft cheeses. But I'm glad that other people are out there doing it. And I do think, so the generation gap idea today is certainly true, but I think is what one of the many things that is weird about modern life is I think, humans have been around for 300,000 years. For a lot of those years, the generation gap wasn't very cavernous. For many, many years, if you were a farmer, your father was a farmer, his father was a farmer, and then like nothing really changed. In these past 300 years, holy shit, batshit crazy. If you showed somebody 100 years ago life today, they wouldn't know what they'd be. You know what I mean? But throughout human existence, there was 100 years between 1310 and 1320, probably not, or 1410 and 14. It was not that big.
Anyway. No, I agree. Yeah. So I mean, modern day society has really sped up the whole process of being human in many ways, right? Yeah. And then in particular, the past, let's say, a couple of decades with the advancement of technology, I mean, it's mind-blowing. It really is mind-blowing, right? So for the first time in human history, we have the ability to have conversations in real time with anyone around the world. We have access to more information than is even really humanly possible. And that's going to have an effect on everyone, including the young generations, right? I mean, so if you talk about Gen Z, for instance, or what's coming up next is Gen Alpha. I mean, they're literally growing up on their phones. And again, when I was 10 or 11 or 12 years old, I wasn't watching bombs being dropped around the world. I wasn't, aware of genocide or whatever the case may be, or famine or whatever it is, earthquakes, hurricanes, natural disasters. And so it's going to have a certain kind of effect on the younger generation that the older generation really can't comprehend or really empathize with, right? I think that's part of the generation gap right there. Can we empathize with these younger kids that are being exposed to information that no one else has been exposed to before?
Yeah, and they have little dopamine hit thing in their pocket, and which we are. I mean, it's not like our generation isn't looking at the phone constantly either. Right. Everybody is. It's designed to do that,
Right.
Yeah.
As we sit here on a podcast in which people are going to watch on their phones.
Isn't that ironic? What am I saying? I was going to do this on stone tablets, but it just doesn't get the ratings.
That could be your new niche, though. Maybe that's like, old school podcasting.
You know what that is, though? That's work with your hands. And like I said, I'm a French Duke. I don't do that shit. I sit in the basement and record podcasts. All right, let's talk about this next one because I want to get the vibes. Oh, this is interesting. The science of bad vibes. All right, so this asks the question, can some places really hold on to negative energy? This is from Popular Mechanics. It explores the concept that certain locations may retain negative energy due to past traumatic events. The article examines theories like emotional residue, where lingering emotional energy affects subsequent visitors, and geopathic stress, where natural environments factors disrupt human well-being. Psychological factors such as expectation and suggestion also play a role in how people perceive the vibe of a place. They mention, I forget which Holocaust site, but I've been to Dachau, and I got to tell you, bad vibes, rightfully so. But was that psychosomatic? It's not like no one goes to Dachau thinking it might be, Disneyland. You know what's going in. So I think there's part of that, but I don't know. Before we get in deeper into the article, do you have a macro opinion on this?
No, I mean, I've read this kind of stuff before over the years, doing my own research and whatnot. I mean, it's not the kind of research I do, but I have read these kinds of things before. And so the basic premise is that our bodies release certain kinds of chemical signals, let's say in our tears, in our sweat, presumably in our urine or even our blood, things like that. It's not really much different than animals marking their territory. That's what happens, right? Although we as humans, as far as I know, don't mark our territories in the same kind of way, but we pick up on these signals in a subconscious manner, right? So let's say you were to walk through a room for a little while. I come by a half hour later, there's residue of your chemicals on that room. And I will subconsciously pick up on those chemicals, right? And it'll make me feel a certain kind of a way. I'll have a certain kind of emotional reaction a certain kind of a way, which then will affect my psychology, so on and so on and so on. Which really then intimates, though, that our lives are more interconnected than we think. We tend to, at least in the West and in America, we tend to picture ourselves kind of like as a a bag of skin with some bones. I'm an individual. I do my own thing. I make my own choices, which is partially true. However, though, our lives are interconnected in all kinds of ways, right? We are part of the environment. We shape the environment shapes us, and likewise, as individuals, we shape each other. It's kind of a symbiotic relationship relative to human existence and human experience. That's kind of what they're talking about here with the bad vibes and chemical signals.
Yeah, but again, because we're binary absolutists, we need to believe that we have total free will, that nothing is affecting us. We do what we do, and we do what we do because we do it. But so in the article they go on, this Dutch team is doing some fascinating studies, one of which they figured out that men's libido declines in the presence of women's tears because something they're calling chemo signals, which is fascinating. But then they doubled down on this little experiment and they had, oh boy. So tears, for example, is one, but then sweat. So they exposed men to things that would make them sweat through fear, sweat through happiness, and just neutral sweat. And then they had the ladies smell the sweat. And this fear sweat made them frown. The happy sweat made them smile, and the other one didn't do anything. What the fuck? That's first of all, gross experiment. But secondly, that raises some questions, doesn't it?
It's pretty far out. I mean, I find it interesting, but yes, the way you're presenting it, it definitely makes it far out. As if I'm just picturing in my mind, putting like different kinds of dog food in front of a dog and see what they like. Right. So Fido likes this one. Fido does not like that one. Fido has this reaction. Fido does not have that reaction. I safely assume, though, that the researchers followed the proper research protocols. No one's rights were violated or anything like that. So let's hope it was all on the up and up.
Yeah, let's pretend it was all on the up and up. I will say the only sweat related story I have is that sweaty football pads smell a certain way, and that makes me think of high school. So that's the only sweat, though. I don't think anyone has ever presented me with a vial of sweat and gone, "What do you think about this?" And then I had some sort of facial feature, and it made it into a study. I don't know. I'm glad that people are out there doing this.
I played sports in high school. Football was my main sport, and man, after 2 days, two days in August and whatnot, or it's about mid season.
Oh yeah,
the locker room did not smell well. I'll tell you that right now. It was a stinky place.
No, and even if you won, it's not like you walked in at the time and it was like, "Oh, it smells so fucking good in here." Like when I smell it now, it's nostalgic, but I don't go, "Oh, I need a cologne that smells like this." You know?
No, I don't think it would sell very well.
I'd buy it for nostalgia. I wouldn't wear it out, but I'd take a whiff here and there.
Maybe it's football season every year. Just put a little bit on Sunday mornings while you're watching your Patriots.
Yeah, if a coach had put me in, we would have won states. I think.
Right.
All right. Listen, I want to get to vibes because this fascinates me. And like I said before you got on the air, you were on another podcast, and someone who's very condescending when you mentioned vibes, which is bizarre. That goes into, in my opinion, at least, the materialistic view of science, and the fact that unless you can measure it and look at it in a goddamn microscope, that it doesn't exist. And it clearly does, because we've all, even the largest skeptic of vibes has walked into a room and felt the feeling of that room. I think we've all done that. If you haven't, you're fundamentally broken.
Sure.
So how do you begin to explain that? And I think, for lack of a better word, probably vibes. Yes?
Yes. Yeah. So I've been interested in vibes really my entire adult life. Started in my late teens. When I was at that age, 18, 19 years old, I started going to raves, underground parties, following bands on tour, and all these scenes, these subculture scenes, were using the word vibe, including myself, right? Vibe the band, vibe the DJ, vibe the dance floor, et cetera, right? And even at that age, though, at some point around 19 or 20, I took up an intellectual interest in this thing we call vibe. And I was asking myself, like, well, we're all using this word, but what actually are we talking about? Like, well, how do we define it? How do we explain it? So on and so on and so on. I then go on to write my first paper on the vibe in a class in college on nonverbal communication. Then I went to graduate school, and for my master's thesis and my doctoral dissertation, I constructed my own philosophy of the vibe, referred to as bodily emanation. And that was, I graduated from grad school back in 2002. And so almost, 23 years later, I'm on podcasts and still interested in this conversation and trying to figure out what the hell is this thing we call vibes.
I think it's good that there's an intellectual bent to the conversation about vibes, because otherwise it goes to that like hippy dippy shit. But it is such clearly a thing. And listen, I'm generally a skeptic when it comes to this shit, but you can't say that it doesn't. You can't be a human and go, I've never felt anything that's not my senses.
Right. Yeah. So just pause there for a moment there, right? So my general shtick that I give on all these podcasts is that I say, well, I define vibes as an exchange of energy between you and other people. So again, an exchange of energy between you and other people. However, we have to ask the question, what is the nature of this energy? Like, what does it mean, right? So for instance, is this energy a physical phenomenon or a metaphysical phenomenon? Is it a material phenomenon or an immaterial phenomenon? Is it a scientific phenomenon or a spiritual phenomenon? Or perhaps it's all of these things, right? And the reason why I pose it as a question is that I want your listeners and your viewers to think about this for themselves, right? So I am a professor, I'm a scholar, I'm a bona fide intellectual, and it's my job. Like I'm trying to induce intellectual thought about this thing we call vibes.
Okay. I'm glad you asked all those questions because my question is it programmed or learned? So I read this book called 10% Happier that makes the argument that you can only, you're about 90% what you are, and you can only affect your happiness by 10%. So something awful happens to you, you probably get a lot sadder, but then you go back to your base level happiness. I only say that to say, like, I've hated children just based on their vibes. Like that kid has a shitty vibe, I don't like him. So then the question is like this existentialist question of does essence proceed?
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
So do bad vibes, is it innate to a person? Are they born with a certain vibe level and that is either, good or bad depending on the person, or do you affect your vibes, or are you one thing as a kid and your vibes get better or worse? Like, where do you stand on this?
All good questions, and my quick answer is all of the above, right? So just like you have a personality, I would say you also have a core vibe to you, right? And that vibe could be good, could be bad, could be weird, could be outrageous, could be subdued, whatever the case may be. But I think everyone has a core vibe. But that vibe, though, will shift depending upon the situation, the context, the immediate moment, what they experienced last week, what they're anticipating next week, so on and so on and so on. Now, the example of the kids, though, like little kids, like you don't like this kid with their vibe. I mean, that is a humorous example, right? And it begs a lot of other questions. So I'm picturing, for instance, the character Damien from The Yeoman, right? So I would assume that if I met Damien as a 5 or 6-year-old kid, he probably has a pretty bad vibe. Right?
Yeah.
Now he's also, isn't he? I think the way the story goes, he's the son of the devil or something like that. Right?
Yeah.
Right. So we can safely assume that if you're the son of the devil, your core vibe's probably pretty bad and pretty negative.
Right.
But now with the kids, though, I mean, the thing, if we take it away from movies and go back to real life here, I mean, kids are shaped by their environment, by their parents, etc. So, I may not blame the kid for their bad vibe. My question would be, what did that kid experience at such an early age to give them a bad vibe already? Now, having said that, since they're so young, they do have the potential to change their core vibe as they grow and as they get older.
I'm just wondering if, like, is vibe genetic, or is it's nature versus nurture? No, because here's the thing: any macro ideology sort of collapses when you involve kids. Like everybody's like, karma's real. So childhood bone cancer is caused by karma. Shut the fuck up. You know what I mean? Like as soon as you take an innocent and you go, how about hating kids? Because we've all been there. We've met shitty kids. So I don't know. It would appear to me under that lens that vibes are probably genetic. You're probably born with some kind of general vibe, I think.
I mean, that's an interesting question. I don't think I've actually thought about genetics and vibes in that kind of way. So I'll spend time on this in the coming weeks and months. But real quickly, I think there could be a connection there, right? So no human being is born into the world as a blank slate, right? We come with genetics, DNA, all those kinds of things. And so one could assume from that point that your core vibe is in some way influenced by your ancestors, like your genetic makeup. So I think it's possible. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I mean, I look at my own kids and I'm not, my 8-year-old son is pretty reasonable and affable and easy to get along with. My 4-year-old daughter is a lawless lunatic. They're raised in the same household, same parents, right? So they have totally different vibes. And I think they just came programmed with the vibes, which begs this other question: who's doing the programming?
Yeah.
Can't wait to find out. Okay. Now, okay, genetic, let's put a fucking pause on that. We all know that cities certainly have vibes. I think Boston feels like something. Miami feels like something. I've been to Lisbon, that feels like something. Barcelona feels like something. So if cities have vibes, it's probably not too crazy to say like countries do, continents do. Does the planet? Are we all contributing to that? Like what's the land view here?
All right. So my own take on this is that each person, or really, I think about it in terms of bodies, right? I try to concretize this, right? It's like I try to move away from the esoteric, really spaced out kind of talk, and let's make this more concrete. So, for example, I've never met a person or a body that didn't have a vibe, right? And every time I experience a vibe, it's through my body. Hence, a vibe is a bodily phenomenon, right? And then once you go understand that, though, that means each individual body has vibes. Every group of body has vibes. Every larger collection of bodies has vibes. So you talk about the vibe of, let's say, a musical concert or a sports team or a town or a city or a region or a country, full-on cultures and societies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Then additionally, if each body is giving off a vibe and there are bodies all across the planet, there must be a global vibe, right? So that's one way of logically thinking through this problematic of global vibes, planet vibes, and so on.
And again, I guess you could go back to genetics, because the genetic makeup of any group of people probably has something to do with, the time and the space when they were created and the culture and blah, blah, blah. So, hey, I think we just explained something here.
But then additionally, I think about, you mentioned like Lisbon and Barcelona. I've been to those places as well. I love those places. One of the reasons why we travel, at least one of the reasons why I travel, is because you get to experience different people, different cultures, and every culture does have its own unique vibe, right? So I've been to Lisbon before. I love Lisbon. I've been to Barcelona. I love Barcelona. And there's definitely a different vibe in those cities than there is here in the United States. So for instance, I love New York, but New York and Lisbon are very, very different vibes. Very different, right? Go on.
Yeah. So I'm an army brat. So I lived the good places where I lived in Greece, Belgium, and South Korea. I graduated high school in South Korea. Now, there's this trope that travel changes you in a positive way, and I think it usually does. But my experience was South Korea, for example. I was there junior and senior in high school. Some people went over there. It was like, this is nothing like the United States. It's awesome. Some people were like, this is nothing like the United States. It sucks. So it isn't a thing. It's not a universal truth that traveling affects everybody for the better. Some people long for the glory and comfort of a double cheeseburger in the face of, Italian pasta. I just wonder if does whatever vibe machine we have, if you're having a positive experience, does it pick up on the vibes of the place and sort of incorporate that into your own vibe? Where does it affect you? Because it does, like when travel affects you positively, and I don't think it's just because shit's pretty and you like the food. I think at your soul, it sort of changes you. And that also is immeasurable. I wonder if there's a vibe connection there. You pick it up on stuff. You're like, oh, we should incorporate some of that vibe.
Sure. So I'll just use Lisbon as an example. So Lisbon over in Portugal. All right. I was there a few years back in 2018, fell in love with it right away. It was awesome. And so as I'm walking down the street, that I'm experiencing this different culture and hence this different vibe, it's also allowing me to experience my own vibe in a different kind of way. Or I'll say it's eliciting from me a different kind of vibe than I'm used to when I'm in the United States, right? So there's a symbiotic relationship. So I go to a new place, I pick on this different vibe. If I like that vibe, I might start to incorporate that kind of vibe into my own body, my own presence, my own personality, right? Now, if I don't like that vibe, then I'll reject and say the kind of things you were saying earlier, like, it's not my place. I don't like this. I want to go back home. But I do think, though, there's a certain kind of incorporation of that collective cultural vibe into our own vibes, which is why we vibe out in certain places and why we don't vibe out in other places.
And that's one of the frustrating things about this association with vibing and the general woo-woo-ness of this. People have been places and felt things that aren't. It can't just be that it smells a little bit different or whatever. Like, it's not going to feel different from touch, but it's a thing. It's definitely a fucking thing.
Well, also, if we stay on the travel thing and tourism thing, so thinking about going to another country and you go to see like their famous artworks, famous architecture, etc. And there's a reason why, though, thousands and thousands of people will travel to the same tourist places, right? Because they will experience a similar kind of vibe. Now, if we're talking about buildings, for instance, you walk into a building, and that building, a famous building, we construct it in a certain kind of a way to really give you a certain experience. That's why it's built that way and why it's famous, right? And so I might go there from, let's say, Philly, right? And then someone else might go there from, I don't know, somewhere in Latin America. And although we don't speak the same language, we have different histories, we go and experience this building in a certain kind of way, which, again, evokes a certain kind of vibe from us, and therefore we can have a certain kind of connection based on that common experience of going to that museum or that building, etc. If that even makes sense, but
it makes a total sense. So it's weird because I quote this, or I reference this book called "Religion for Atheists" by Alain de Botton. He's a British philosopher. He also, so I reference that fucking every day. He also wrote this book called "The Architecture of Happiness," and he does a deep dive into architecture and how it makes people feel, and how architects know what they're doing when they're making buildings to evoke certain feelings.
Yep.
That proves to you that space affects your feeling without the traditional senses. So it's a known phenomenon, but again, it's something that I just don't think we consider in the same ways that we consider everything else. You know?
Sure. Well, let's get that back just for a second here. I mean, most people, for instance, decorate their houses and their rooms to make them feel a certain kind of way. I mean, so I can see into your room, you can see into my room. I decorate in a certain kind of way because it makes me feel a certain kind of way. I want to feel this way, so I put up certain posters, put up my books, put up my lights, all that kind of stuff. I mean, so you may not be a famous architecture, but you're doing the same kind of process on a smaller scale in your own house.
Yeah, and we get that, the whole feng shui thing. Like, we believe that that's the thing.
Yep.
All right. Well, let me ask you this. Back to the scientific thing. So I think we're a materialist, reductionist culture. I think everything has to be measurable. Is our scientific obsession with what can't be seen, tracked, or graphed, does that hurt the vibes thing? And do you think it's a Western phenomenon? Do you think, because the East tends to be more accepting of the immeasurable?
Yeah. All right. So again, like I said earlier, I want to be clear about this. I'm in no way anti-science. If there wasn't for science, we wouldn't have this conversation right now.
No, listen, we don't have to be binary absolutists on the show. We can say we love science, but also just get in bed with vibes. You'll love it.
But there are limitations to science, right? If you think about the nature of the universe, in the nature of the human body, science can only explain a small portion of that. I mean, it's minuscule, right?
Yeah.
And then the scientific understandings change from generation to generation, right? Just because we can't measure something, just because we can't come to let's say a raw factual understanding, does not mean it's not true. Does not mean that we're not experiencing it. Does not mean we can't come up with paradigms to explain these things. Right? Yeah. So, for example, we all fall in love. And sure, nowadays they can like measure your brain waves when you fall in love, stuff like that. But if you ever been in love, I mean, it's a hell of a trip, man. Why am I feeling this way? Why am I so attracted to this person? Do they love me back? All these fears start to pop up. Nonetheless, though, just because we can't measure love doesn't mean it's not happening. It's not true.
Absolutely. And you know what's strange too is, all right, vibes are sort of immeasurable at this point, but it's no less weird if you take away our understanding that I'm making sounds with my mouth hole vibrationally. I'm sending them through a fucking computer. Somehow 2 holes in your skull are in, bringing them in. They're sending them to a bowl full of goo encapsulated in a fucking skeleton. It's making sense of it, and then it's responding in the same way. That is batshit crazy. We happen to understand it, but it doesn't make it any less crazy, you know?
Yeah, I want to say that might be one of the most profound explanations of sound I've ever heard before. So
now, listen, I'm not just gorgeous. I'm also a genius. I know it's strange. It's very strange. You don't see that happening too often, but here we are. And I hope this next question doesn't come across as sexist. Although, listen, in Trump's America, we can say whatever we want. I talked to a psychologist, therapist. I don't know. I think it was a therapist last week on the show. And he does men's groups. He mostly talks to men. And his hypothesis when he started this whole thing years ago was that if you got a men's group together, the men would only talk about sports and politics and surface level bullshit. But he found as soon as you get a bunch of men together, they start talking about feelings. And at the end, they're saying, I love you. And they're hugging. And his thing is like, if you add one woman to the mix, everybody like goes back to their manly persona. And I wonder, because it's not like a woman walks in and goes, listen, you pansies, a lady's here, change. I wonder if that, since we don't understand vibes and they're immeasurable to some degree right now, if a woman's vibe changes the way a man acts just on a level we can't quite articulate. It could be, right?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. I'll try to keep this simple, but one could assume that different forms of gender presentation give off a different vibe, just as, let's say, different races and ethnicities might give off a different vibe. And when I'm saying this, that's not a bad thing. Like, that's not a critique. It's like, it's kind of just natural. Like, we're going back to earlier, talking about different societies, different cultures, so on and so on and so on. Right. And so if you have a collection of men in a room, right, and they're vibing on each other in a different kind of way than they usually do, right? And they're letting their guard down. Then you have someone that walks in that's a woman. They tense up again. Their insecurities come to the forefront, and they're picking up on the possibility that she might be judging them. So that changes all the entire vibrational dynamic of the group. So yeah, I mean, I could buy that, sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's socialized behavior as well. Sure. Don't get me wrong, but I think if we're accepting that there's a room full of vibes and people may be vibing on the same level, and a new vibration comes in, if we're saying vibes is short for vibration, which I know that some sort of like there's a muddying of the waters there too. It's reasonable to think that a new vibe enters the room and then new vibes happen.
Well, it's true. I mean, everyone's had that experience, right? So, you know, you're in a room with the people, and then someone walks in, and you feel it right away. Like all of a sudden, the vibe in the room is different. And it's because of this one person. Right. I'm thinking in particular of like work environments, right? Let's say it's a group of work colleagues that all get along. And then that one work colleague that nobody likes all of a sudden walks into the room. It changes everything.
Yeah. That's why we've all had that goddamn experience. And I know I'm belaboring the point at this point, but that's a thing. That's definitely a fucking thing. And it happens all the time. And I think we just accept it and move on. And we're never like, that's weird and interesting and deserves some sort of intellectual study about the whole goddamn thing until we figure it out. Because I'm telling you, if there was an app that could read vibes in the room, it'd be the most popular thing in the world. You imagine?
Yeah. And just pick up on that one more second here. So one of the main motivations behind my own work is to help people articulate their own experience and their own ideas about vibes. Right. So I have my own philosophy, I have my own perspective about this, but I'm one person. If I'm lucky, I'll live to be 100 years old. I'm here and I'm gone tomorrow, right? That kind of thing, right? Yeah. But I'm trying to have other people like realize this is a real phenomenon, right? And then what do you think about it? How would you explain your own experience to yourself and to other people?
Listen, right into the next question. I think I have immaculate vibes, as I may have mentioned in the beginning. I think everybody would agree. But do you think people can control their vibes, and to what degree? Or do you think it's like the happiness thing where you have a base level vibe, and then you can only get so high and so low? Where do you stand on this?
Yeah, so I do think that people can develop the ability to control their own vibe. Right now, what do I mean by that? Right. Well, one, you have to become more aware of the fact that you're giving off a vibe. Right. Yeah. Become more aware of the fact that other people are giving off vibes. And then you want to take note of how people are responding to your core vibe or to your vibe in a certain kind of situation. If you're getting the response you want, then keep vibing the way that you're vibing. Right. However, if you're getting a response that you don't like, then you have the ability to change your vibe. Now it takes effort though, right? So you have to be aware of your body, be aware of your surroundings, right? Kind of feel yourself into the world. And then this gets kind of meta here, but can you feel your own vibe? And that's it gets a little strange here all of a sudden, but I think you can. So if you can be self-reflective about your own personality, about your own, let's say, style of communication, why can't you also be aware of your own vibe and then therefore change it if you so feel you need to?
Yeah. So I've bombed. I think we all have when you're talking to a group of people and you're like, fuck, something's not right here. Yeah. Now, you know what I like about this? Instead of going, oh, I'm not funny, I go, no, your fucking vibe's off. It's not me. My material is gold here. It's that your bullshit vibes aren't allowing me we're not getting on the same level because of you.
I think that's partially true though, right? So just because you're not getting the reaction you want does not mean you're the problem. It could be the other person.
Especially when you were here's my thing. I'm trying to enter good vibes here. Like I'm not here with nefarious means. If you're blocking my good vibes, I think you're the shithead,
Well, if we think about, let's say, stand-up comedians, for example, which I know you have at least some experience with here, right? The audience in the crowd may not like you for any kind of reason, right? Doesn't mean you're not funny. Does not mean you're not telling good jokes. It could be the wrong audience for the wrong comedian or the wrong public speaker or the wrong band, whatever the case may be, right? Not all vibes gel with each other. And so if you're okay with that, then you just move on.
I think part of it too, and listen, this is a little goofy science here, but I watched this documentary, I think it's called I Am, and it just introduced a whole bunch of weirdo ideas that are somewhat testable. They mentioned this study that says, so the New York Times, the Sunday New York Times crossword puzzle, I think is the most difficult, right? Like it's notoriously hard or something. So they studied very few people can finish it on Sunday. But if you introduce a whole new group of people and they take it Monday, they do a little better. Tuesday with a whole new group of people, a little better. And the argument is like the answers are out there in the ether, and somehow they become more accessible in your brain, which is fucking, it's strange. But if you look at like Norm Macdonald, for example, very odd comedian, hilarious, but he bombed for years. It's almost as if he had to have some sort of collective acceptance before that style worked.
Sure.
And I don't know if it's just like you keep hearing him, seeing him, and eventually come around, or if it's just like time and place. Because I think, that idea of like someone was ahead of their time is, maybe just the vibe wasn't ready for your shit. Doesn't mean your shit wasn't good. Just the collective vibe wasn't accepting.
No, I totally agree. Yeah. Ahead of your time, before your time, just not the right fit at the right time. I think it's all very plausible, definitely.
Yeah, and I think vibe would be a good way to sort of explain that.
Sure. Wrong vibe at the wrong time.
Wrong vibe at the wrong time makes a lot of sense. Okay, a few more before we go. Something we talked about earlier, but okay. Do you think everybody's pilled up these days? I know the statistic is wild. It used to be, it's not true, but it sounds something like the United States represents 5% of the world population, but we consume 90% of the world's pharmaceuticals. It's really about half that. It's about 45, but 90 sounds better. So we're taking things like antidepressants and mood stabilizers, and then there's the societal pressures to act a certain way and present a certain way. Do you think these things might fuck up a vibe or screwing up people's natural vibes and ability to vibe with others? And that's probably not good.
Interesting question. You asked some good questions. This is a good question. Interesting. Well, in terms of us being so heavily medicated, the first thing I want to think about is like, well, why is that? Like, what's going on in our society where we have to be medicated to just deal with daily life?
I think two things, right? Can I interrupt you? It's a toxic environment, but also we have a for-profit healthcare system, which probably plays into it, if I had to guess.
I don't disagree with any of that. So yes, I agree with that. Yes, 100%. Right. So we're taking all these medications, right? And that it's like if you have a couple beers, it's going to affect your vibe, right? So the medications are going to affect your vibe the same kind of way, not the same way, but in the same kind of way, in the sense of it's going to alter the vibe you put out to the world, might also alter how you experience the vibe of other people. Now, in terms of messing up your own core vibe, that's interesting. Now, I want to be fair here, right? There are plenty of people, though, that are literally better off being medicated for a variety of reasons.
Oh, sure.
So in that case, it might actually help them kind of uncover their core vibe, right? But I do agree, though, that we are heavily medicated, and I wish we lived in a society where we didn't have to be so heavily medicated. So it's really commentary on our collective society.
It is. And here's the thing, too. Like, I'm certainly, listen, both of us, I think, have said it. We are not anti-science, probably not anti-medicine. But if we were this heavily medicated and we also came out and we were one of the happiest countries every year, I go, shit, it's working. But it's not, because we always fail. It's sort of like how statins are the most heavily prescribed drugs and we still die of heart attacks. So like, again, I'm not saying I'm anti-medicine or anything, but it's conceptually bizarre that the most prescribed thing doesn't affect the most prescribed death. Which is
Sure, yeah.
All right, psychedelics. So this is a subject that comes up a lot on this show. Listen, I'm very pro psychedelic, but again, I have an 8-year-old and a 4-year-old, so I can't eat mushrooms as much as I would like to. It's very rare at this point because I can't get away for 8 hours to go lick colors and see sounds. But I do think, so this ego death thing, I floated in sensory deprivation chambers, which I think forces the same idea of ego death. Like you just cease to exist as a physical being. You're out there in the ether. You're thinking some really weird thoughts, and you're just sort of a thing, a soul, maybe a vibration. I do think psychedelics, any of these tryptophans, seems to make this shit more clear. And I don't know if I don't want you to admit to any drug use or anything, but what's your experience with psychedelics and vibrations?
Well, there is a whole body of literature at this point that is explaining exactly what you're explaining, right? Where you have psychologists, biochemists, cognitive scientists, etc., that are actually studying the effects of psychedelics on the brain, on the body, on perception, on mood, possibly being used for therapeutic purposes, etc., etc., etc. I also want to clarify that this type of activity has been going on for all of human history. It's not new, right? Mm-hmm. You can go back and study tribal societies, indigenous populations, and there are long histories of human beings ingesting certain kinds of substances to alter their minds in a positive kind of way. Mm-hmm. Now, the question is, how does that all play into the vibe? Well, I mean, it means a lot of different things, right? We could ask the question, is it possible that certain kinds of psychedelics open you up to the possibility of different forms of human experience. One of them, which might be this thing we call the vibe, right? So if you let down your guard, if you soften your ego, or in some senses, kill your ego, right? Then all of a sudden you're no longer looking at the world through a little peephole, but rather you are in touch with all that exists, right? And once you're in touch with all that exists, that's a whole different ballgame, right? It alters your consciousness and makes you more aware of vibes, vibrations, moods, energies, frequencies, etc.
I think we're so beholden to our physical senses. You know, like I can't quite make this sound as smart as I think it should, but the only reason we can see is because we have these gelatinous balls fucking welded inside our heads. You know, the only reason we can hear is, again, these fucking holes on the side of our brains. But we know, for example, that black holes, I think they can only be seen through infrared light, which means that they exist. We just don't have the parts to see them.
Sure.
There we go. There's a lot going on that we probably don't have the physical parts, like, you know, microscopic shit. We just can't. It's there. It's definitely there.
Right.
So there has to be, you know, things we can't even conceive of. And I think once you get to the vibe thing and you're off in the ether, to your point, we're not beholden to our senses anymore, and we can experience extra.
Right. And then to extend that, so every human being goes through a process of socialization. That's how we're built, right? You are socialized into a certain society, a certain culture, a certain family, a certain educational system, and so on. Then what the literature shows is that if you sometimes ingest psychedelics, it breaks down that socialization process. You're no longer attached to a certain outlook. You're no longer attached to certain paradigms or ideologies. And from there, though, you become more free to experience the world in a more open fashion. And again, that might open you to the possibility of vibes.
I do think it, and listen, I'm not into this kind of shit. I don't meditate or anything, but the floating in a sensory deprivation chamber.
I've done that myself. I've been in those tanks before. Yeah.
Yeah. So you get to like theta wave meditation. And the first time I did that, I walked outside and wind hit me and I got emotional because I never paid attention to wind before. Like it was always there and it felt so good in the moment because I was so mindful. Like that's a different way of thinking that is in my own dumb brain. It just fucking happened. I was always capable of it. Right. But you just take so much for granted, and there's so much other stimulation, blah, blah. It's fucking great. All right. But sort of back to the brain waves synchronizing when people interact, and vibes, and digital communication. So we know that conversating with other humans and hanging out and having a good time is good for our brains. But we do a lot of this now digitally, how we're doing this now, and through text messages. Do you think that's fucking up vibes?
It definitely changed the vibe. Right? Whether it's messing up or not, I'm not sure. I don't want to take a grand stand here, but it definitely changed the vibe, right? So I think there's a qualitative difference between, let's say, having a face-to-face conversation in person or via technology like we're doing right now. Now, the technology is great. I think this is awesome. Like the fact that we can have this conversation thousands of miles away is awesome. But there's a difference there that's happening, right? And I do worry, though, that for some people, in particular the younger generations, they're so accustomed to only having conversations through technology that it might inhibit their ability to have conversations face-to-face, person-to-person, etc. I'm not making a grand stand here, but I do worry about that kind of thing.
I think it's reasonable. You know, I think studies have proven that reading a physical book is better than reading it on the screen. There's some sort of tactile nature about the medium that helps us grasp, which is weird, you know, and it's weird that talking on a computer screen, as natural as it feels, probably isn't as good for our dumb brains as if we were, you know, sitting next to each other. It's just, totally. I don't know. Fascinating. All right, couple more before we go. Who, and I don't know if you're married or have a girlfriend or boy, whatever it is, I have no idea, but you can't answer your significant other. Okay. Who has the best vibes you've ever met?
Oh, man. Oh, good question.
Yeah.
Best vibe I have ever met. I don't know what I would say to that question, man. That's, oh, man. I'll answer it in a roundabout way, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not people I've met, but people I would have liked to have met, right? Yeah, okay. So Abby Hoffman from the 1960s, a self-described counterculture revolutionary. From what I know, I've read almost everything he's ever written. But from what I know, he was a lot to handle, right? But he's also very genuine, very authentic, and very sincere. So I'd like to meet him, right? Yeah. Would love to maybe hang out with someone like Dr. King or Gandhi. Yeah. Or Simone de Beauvoir, who's a famous French author and intellectual, right? Like I'm thinking about like people in history who I admire and what vibe they would be like in real life.
You're going through historical vibes here. You know what's scary about that is if their vibe doesn't match their
Oh, that could very well happen, right? You have public persona, and then you meet the person in real life. Like, what the hell is this? This is not who I thought you were. You're fake and phony. This is not going to work.
That's why, obviously I worship Tom Brady, and to a slightly lesser degree because of all the bullshit recently, Bill Belichick, but I do not. I think they would be boring as fuck. Like, you know how I'd love to have a beer. No, I don't want to have a beer. Either one of those motherfuckers seem like awful. But you've given me the 6 best days of my life. And so of my marriage and the birth of my children.
Sure.
Okay. One more before I let you go. Where would you rank your own vibe? I don't know what the scale is. I don't know if it's 1 to 10, if it's like bottom 5, top 5, whatever. Like, how do you think your vibe is?
I don't know, man. It's put me on the spot here. I'll give myself an 8. I'll give myself, if 10's the highest, I'll give myself an 8 vibe. Now, what does that mean, right? So I pride myself on being genuine. I pride myself on being authentic. I definitely pride myself on being honest. And I think those will give me at least an 8, if not higher.
Okay. I guess attached to this question, you're a college professor. Mm-hmm. How is the macro vibe with kids these days? Are you feeling good about their vibes, bad about their vibes?
Good question. I think they are grappling with a lot of things that is hard for all of us, but when you're 18 or 19, it's a lot to process, a lot to deal with, right? So Trump administration, an economy that's been not good, so good for a very long time, at least more expensive, right? A variety of global conflicts all over the planet, obviously the climate crisis. And so there's a lot to deal with here. And so I want to be more supportive of the younger generation, understand that what they're dealing with is a lot to handle at an early age.
So would you say you're generally positive about their vibe?
I am actually, yeah. So if you mean it that way, yeah. So I get along very well with my students. So right now they're still at the Gen X students, right? Not Gen X, that's us, that's me. Gen Z students. And so I'm very fond of Gen Z. I think they are very earnest. I think they are very sincere. I think they want to make the world a better place, and they're just dealing with a lot of things right now. So yeah.
Well, I got to tell you, when I Googled you, your professor rating came up, and the kids like you too. You get very high marks there on the professor rating website. I don't know how often you Google yourself, but just so you know.
I have stopped reading those reviews a long, long time ago. But yeah, I get along with my students. I like to think I'm a good teacher. I like to think I'm supportive of my students, and I think they appreciate that. Speaking
of not reading your reviews, first of all, yours are very good, but I'll tell you the worst vibey place on the planet is the YouTube comment section. That is a cesspool of bad vibes. I could never read it unless I'm legitimately sucking. I'm awful and dumb. Fucking. Oh my God. So bad. Those vibes, awful vibes.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to let you go. You're fantastic. I love this. Before we go though, do you want to talk to people about where they can go to see the 20-minute vibe, where they can buy your book someday, where they can get more of you?
Sure. So for my vibe work, they can go to my website, which is simply 20minutevibe.com. Again, 20minutevibe.com. And there you can find my links to Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And just very briefly, the whole 20-minute vibe project is really just me sharing my knowledge about vibes with the general public. It's not meant for academics or scholars. It is for the general public. And I'm providing you with information about the vibe in a way that's accessible, right? Short chunks of information, short videos, short essays, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Beautiful. All right, man. Again, you were great. Thank you for coming on. Do me a favor. I'm going to log off of the official recording, but stick around in the green room so we can debrief and deep vibe. What do you think?
Will do, man. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Hey, no problem. Hey, we'll be back tomorrow, America. I forget what we're talking about. I'm sure it's going to be thrilling. Not as good as vibes, though. They will be good vibes, though. All right. See ya. Have a good, what is it, Wednesday?